Hey, what's up YouTube? Pirate King Codex here. I have a match against Sakura Kingdom. We play Green Kid versus Blue Doflamingo. My opponent starts out by playing a blocker outlaw and passes turn. Over on my turn, I decide to play Joey Bonnie and activate the ability. So I get to look at the top 5 cards of my deck and choose a Supernova type card to put into my hand. And I choose the 7 cost Kid and pass turn. And my opponent pays 3 to drop the 3 cost Doflamingo. So you can look at the top 5 cards of his deck and rearrange them in any order and choose to put them on top or bottom. And this is just a casual match, so we're playing just to kind of get a sense for what may be at the right place. So we were also casually talking as we were playing, so we're not really playing in a competitive setting. So my opponent decides to attack my Joey Bonnie with his leader, and he passes turn. And with 4 done at this point, I'm deciding on how I want to use my resources. I have a few options here. I have a few blockers, I have some Capones, I have an Ezo. So at this point I decided to just pay the 3. And I'm just trying to think about the best move here, if I want to commit to the Ezo. Like I said, we're trying to kind of get a better sense of the game with the practice. So I do put the Ezo, and I can tap down a character 4 or less. So I'm trying to decide which blocker makes most sense to rest here at this point. And I decide to rest his Doflamingo. And now I decide to attack in with my leader to his leader for 5,000. And my opponent decides to just counter this. With my last on, I just decide to play a Capone Beige and pass turn. And from here, my opponent's deciding on the best course of action. So he starts by attaching a Don to his leader. We're still getting used to the game and some of these decks here, so we're taking a little extra time to try to find the best plays. But my opponent decides to attack for 8,000 to my leader, and off the top he plays the Boa Hancock. And I decide to block with my Capone. And my opponent passes turn over to me. I attach 2 Don to my leader. And I decide to attack his Boa Hancock that's now rested for 7,000. I try to take this opportunity to get rid of her, but he decides to block with the law. And I decide to attach 2 Don to my Ezo and to attack his Boa Hancock for 5,000. But he decides to counter it. With my last 2 Don, I decide to play a killer to get a blocker on the field, and I pass turn. So my opponent rests 4, he plays Jinbei, and he sends my killer to the bottom of the deck. My opponent attaches a Don to Doflamingo, but I didn't notice at the time, but he mixes up the cost for which would be attached to his leader and what the tap is. So he actually could have had an extra Don on the attack, but I'm able to counter with just a 2K instead, but he does play the Gecko Morio off the top of the deck using the leader ability. And then from there, my opponent passes turn. Yeah, we've been used to playing online, so this is one of the few times we've been able to play in person outside of the Super Pre-release. And at this point, I decided to pay 7 to drop the Blocker Kid. And then with my last turn, I decided to drop a Capone as well. So then I attack his leader for 5,000 with my leader. My opponent's deciding on how he wants to handle this. He has a few blockers. But he decides to take the life instead. And then I pass turn over to my opponent. Okay, so he attaches 2 Dawn to the leader. And he decides to add 1 more to attack 8,000 to my life. He triggers his leader ability. And for right now, he forgets to tap the Dawn, but he'll remember that in just a moment. But he does play the Boa Hancock off the top. And I decided to just block it with my Capone. And he decides to attach Dawn to his Boa Hancock so he can get the effect off on block. He attaches another 2 to the Gecko Moria and attacks my life for 7. Now I don't want this double attack to go through. I'm trying to see the best way to stop this. I decide to just block it with my Blocker Kid. And then I also add a 2k counter with the Ezo. And then my opponent passes turn back over to me. So my opponent's board is starting to get pretty full here, so I want to start clearing it out. I'm still pretty sure on my side. I do play the Diaz Drake in order to KO his Boa Hancock. And I attach 2 to the Ezo. And I want to get rid of this Moria because I'm afraid of that double attack. So then I attack for 5,000 to the Moria. But my opponent decides to counter this. I'm debating on whether or not I can get through with the leader. But I decide to attack with my Blocker Kid for 8,000 to the Gecko Moria. Again, I really want to get this off the board so I don't have to worry about this threat anymore. My opponent decides to block, but also activate the Love Love Mellow. And is able to draw off the Love Love Mellow as well as the Hancock ability because the Dawn was attached. So I try again, and with my leader attack the Moria for 5,000, hoping this one will go through. Now my opponent's deciding on whether or not to commit the resources, but he decides to counter this one as well. And that's going to be it for this time. I'm going to have to pass turn at this point. My opponent attaches 5 to the Jinbei, so he can attack me for 7,000. So I decided to just take the life at this point. And I don't activate a trigger. He attaches 2 to his leader, so he can get the ability. He taps an extra Dawn, so he tries to attack my leader. He plays the Martial D-Teach off the top, but now he's debating on whether or not he has to activate the ability. He doesn't have really any great targets on my side, but it's not a Mei ability, so he does have to activate it. But he notices that the Jinbei is actually a great target here, so he can return the Jinbei back to his hand so he can use it again. So now to resolve the attack for the 7,000. And I'm deciding on whether or not I want to block it or counter it, but I decided to just take the life at that point. No trigger. He attaches a Dawn to his Boa Hancock so he can get the on-block ability. Now my opponent's deciding on whether or not it's worth it to attach the Dawn. I'll try to get another attack in with his Moria. But he decides to play the Law instead using Dawn, and he passes turn. With my 3 Dawn, I decide to play no Kiku. And then I attach a Dawn to my blocker Kid. And I decide to attack his leader with my leader for 5,000. My opponent's deciding on how he wants to handle this. He can either block or play a counter. So he just decides to counter with a Doflamingo card from hand. And now I attack his leader for 6,000 with the Diaz Drake. He blocks, counters with the Mihawk, and draws a card off of this. And I decide to attack the Boa Hancock again for 8,000 with my Kid. He just blocks it with the Law. I pay 4 Dawn here in order to play another Drake, but I'll play the other Drake. This one will add plus 1,000 power to my Supernova Marine type characters. So he decides to play another blocker Doflamingo, so he can rearrange the top 5 cards of his deck. So he can set up his leader ability. So he attaches 3 Dawn here to the Teach. He attacks the Drake for 7,000. And at this point, I'm debating on whether or not I value the Drake enough to protect it. 6,000 is pretty good for the attack, but he's already used his on-play effect. So I decided to just let him go. And my opponent attaches 2 Dawn to his leader to attack my leader. He plays the Teach off the top to bounce the Okiku back to my hand. And then I do have 2 Dawn open here, so I decide to play the Punk Gibson to counter. And I get to rest one of my opponent's characters that's 4 or less. So I'm afraid this is Gecko Moria with the double attack, so I decide to rest that one. He attaches a Dawn to his Boa Hancock to make sure he gets the trigger on block, and he passes back over to me. I attach a Don to my Kid and to my Drake to make sure I get the effects off. Yeah, we're just kind of chatting here. We're talking about how the 7 cost blocker has been kind of a pain to get through. But I decided to pay 3 for the Okiku. And then I also play a Bonnie and activate the ability here to look at the top 5 cards of my deck. Grab a Supernova type card. So I'm looking for a high value card. And I decided to go with the 8 cost Kid. So I attached a Don to the Ezo to attack his Teach. He debates on whether or not to let it go, but he decides to counter it. So I attack his Gecko Moria for 7,000. The Drake gets the plus 1,000 from himself when he's rested. I really want to get rid of this Gecko Moria. His board's going to get pretty full. He has a few blockers, and I don't want this double attack to be a threat every turn. But he decides to block it with the Doflamingo. And I attach it on to my leader. So I attack the Gecko Moria for 7,000 here with the Drake ability kicking in on the leader. Yeah, my opponent here is trying to decide whether or not it's worth it to commit the resources to protecting the Gecko Moria, but he decides to just let it go at this point. So then I go for another attack against his leader for 9,000 because he also gets the effect from the Drake. And then I'm going to pass turn from here. Yeah, so his board's going to be a little emptier this time. I spent a lot of time trying to clear out his board. Finally get rid of that Moria. My board's pretty full now. And then my opponent kindly reminds me that the Kid was supposed to untap. He decides to use his Teach to attack the tapped Bonnie. I decide to let it go. My opponent doesn't want the Bonnie to stay on the field longer than it has to, so that way I can keep accruing cards to use them as a resource. He attaches 2 Dawn to his leader in preparation to use the ability. And he decides to attack 7,000 into my Drake. He activates the ability here and plays a Boa Hancock. Now I wanted to protect this Drake. He adds a lot of value to my attackers here, so I decided to block with my 7 cost Kid. And then I'm going to play a counter with a 2,000 for the Ezo. He's floating 4 Dawn here. He decides to commit and play the Jinbei. So he plays the the Jinbei to put the Okiku back to the bottom of the deck. And then he was back in his hand because it got bounced earlier in the game. But I just forgot, so I didn't account for that when I tried to play the Okiku again. He attaches it on to the Boa Hancock and passes turn. So I have a few options here. So I decided to tap 8 Dawn, I figured now's a good time to play the 8 cost kid. Since I have my 7 cost kid already on the field, I want to start to prevent my opponent from attacking my leader. So I'm going to attach 1 Don to the Drake. I'm going to go after this Bow Hancock for 7,000. Now I want to make sure to attack with the Drake first, so that way my other characters will get the ability. But he decides to block it with the other Bow Hancock, so we can at least get the card draw off of it. So then I attack this Bow Hancock for 6,000. And my opponent's debating on whether or not to counter here. He plays Love Love Mellow. I attach a Don to my 7 cost kid and attack his Bow Hancock for 9,000. At that point, he decides to just let it go. And I pass turn at this point. So my opponent pays 3 to drop another Doflamingo blocker, so he can look at the top 5 cards of his deck and rearrange it so he can get more value out of his leader. Now he's debating on what to do for his next action. So he wants to use his Doflamingo ability. So he attacks the Drake for 7,000. It triggers the ability. He's able to play the Moria off the top, so he's able to return more of his 7 Warlord type characters back to his hand. So he grabs the Bow Hancock, so that way he gets from the blocker, and he can get card draw using the ability. So now to resolve the attack. So the Drake is being attacked for 7,000. And I really value this card, but at this point, I'm trying to debate on whether or not to save it. So I block with the kid, and I counter with the Apu for 2,000. Then he commits another 4 Don to the Teach. He really wants to get rid of this Drake, so he tags it for 8,000, but I have to let it go. And he passes turn over to me. I start by paying 2 to play the Cat Viper. So now I'm able to rest one of his characters. That's 3 or less. So I tap down his blocker. I attach 1 Don to my blocker kid and 1 to my 8 cost kid. I attach 2 Don to my Ezo. And then I attack the leader for 5,000. So he counters this with the Moria. Now I attach 1 Don to my leader. So I attack his leader for 6,000. At this point he takes the life, but doesn't activate a trigger. And then with his blocker still rested, I decide to attack his leader for 9,000. I figured I can get a few attacks in here and whittle down his life. Then attack the leader again for 8,000. He does have a few more cards in his hand, so he has a few more options. But he ends up taking the life here as well. And now he's debating on whether or not to activate the trigger. So he decides to play down the Jinbei. So that puts him at 5 characters. And he decides to put the Cat Viper at the bottom of the deck. And I decide to pay 3 and discard a card from my hand to attack again with my leader. So I can try to get rid of his blocker. So that way it won't be a nuisance next turn. My opponent decides to deliberate on whether or not to save it. But he realizes that it's important to keep this blocker alive, but he commits 3 cards to counter that. And then I pass turn back to my opponent. And then he was trying to plan out his move. And he plays another Jinbei for 4 and puts the Izo at the bottom of the deck. His goal now is to clear out my field so I don't have as many attacks to come through next turn. But he plays another Boa Hancock. As he doesn't have any way to get through my 8-cost kid, he passes turn. Okay, so I decide to attack his leader for 8,000. But he plays the Love Love Mellow in order to counter. He didn't realize that he had 2 cards in his hand, so he could have drawn another card here. But then I attack his leader again for 7,000. He's weighing his options here. But with only 2 cards in hand, he decides to take the life. But does not activate any trigger. And then since I'm not going to be able to close out the game this turn, I decide to attach the 2 extra Dawn to my other characters so they get their effects. He still has 2 blockers on the field here. So I need to try to get through them. So I attack his leader for 5,000 to try to clear one out, but he's able to counter it. At this point, I pay 5 to play my last card, which is Hawkins. I need to start clearing out some of these blockers, so Hawkins will help out with that. But at this point, I decided to just pass turn. My opponent still needs a way to get past this 8-cost kid. And with blue Doflamingo, there's not too many options. The only option he really has is to attack it with the 9-drop Mihawk, which he plays here to put the 7-cost kid to the bottom of the deck. And my opponent's explaining that he had the Mihawk in his hand last turn, but he had to get rid of the Izo, and he said that there was no way he'd be able to survive with so many attacks. And then he also wasn't able to confirm if he was going to have a counter from the life. So just to be on the safe side, he decided to clear out the board a little bit more. But at this point, he has to pass turn. So to help clear out some of the blockers, I attach a Don to the Hawkins. And I attack his life to bait a blocker here. And my opponent has 2 cards in hand, both with 2k counter. But he's trying to debate on how to handle this. So he blocks with the Boa Hancock. And he's able to draw another 2k counter here. But the Hawkins does untap, so I get to attack again. So I go for the leader, hoping to have him block. But at this point, he decides to just counter with 2Ks with the Albedo. So now I attack with 8,000 to the leader. And then I attach as much Dawn as I can to my leader. I leave 3 open just in case I need another attack, but that's enough to close out the game.